The carnival buzzed with life, bright lights blinking like stars, the scent of cotton candy and roasted peanuts hanging thick in the summer air, and the chaotic symphony of laughter, music, and mechanical whirring blending into one wild pulse. Kids ran past with oversized teddy bears, teenagers shrieked from the tilt-a-whirl, and tired parents leaned against food stalls, sipping on lemonade. It looked like the perfect small-town evening, until it wasn't. Amid the flashing lights and painted smiles stood my daughter, her wheelchair parked next to the entrance of the ride called the Cyclone. It was a fast-spinning cage-like machine that was clearly never built for someone like her. I had just turned away, just for a second, to grab her favorite drink, her face still glowing with excitement over being invited to a special seat by none other than Karen, the HOA president who had suddenly taken a strange interest in helping. I remember feeling uneasy. Something about her tone was just off. Karen wore her signature blazer, even in the heat, her expression plastic, her kindness, too, rehearsed. She had offered to escort my daughter to the ride, assuring me she'd be safe. "We have everything under control," she had smiled, a shade too wide. I trusted her, because in that moment I wanted to believe in the community. That was my first mistake. As I walked back, I caught a glimpse of Karen leaning in close to the ride operator, whispering something, her hand subtly slipping into a console on the side. My daughter's smile was still there, but I could see the shift the moment her small hand reached for the safety belt and Karen's hand gently moved it away. The bar came down with a loud click. Locked. Secured, but not really. I began to walk faster, heart hammering now. Something wasn't right. Then the ride jerked forward, spinning violently, the cage hurling from side to side. My daughter's body flailed, unnaturally, her arms thrashing not in excitement, but in fear. Her mouth opened in a scream that was swallowed by the music. And that's when I ran. I screamed for them to stop the ride, but no one heard. No one listened. Time froze. Like in the middle of a nightmare you can't wake up from. People kept cheering, snapping photos, utterly oblivious. The operator ignored me, focused on the controls, until a sharp metallic snap rang through the air like a shot. The ride jerked again, and this time I saw it, the seatbelt had come undone. My daughter was halfway out of her seat now, held in only by sheer panic and desperation. The crowd gasped as the ride came to an emergency halt, a screeching metal protest. I reached her just as the ride doors flung open, nearly collapsing as I grabbed her, shaking, sobbing, drenched in sweat and tears. Her lips were blue, her body limp. My hands trembled as I unbuckled the remaining straps, rage bubbling beneath my skin. Karen stood off to the side, arms folded, expression unreadable, except for a flicker of something cruel behind her eyes. Not regret, not concern, something else. And that's when I realized the truth. This wasn't an accident. Freeze frame. That's my daughter. And that woman over there? That's HOA Karen. What she did next almost ended my daughter's life. You probably think you've heard bad HOA stories before. But trust me, you haven't heard mine. Fade to black. Let me take you back to how we got here. We moved into Brookidge Estates 3 months before the carnival, me and my daughter, Layla. I remember the first day so clearly. The rows of identical houses with pristine lawns and white fences felt like something out of a dream, or maybe a commercial for some utopia neighborhood where nothing ever goes wrong. I was a single mom trying to start over after a brutal divorce and years of financial juggling. I'd saved for years to afford that house. Not because it was luxurious, but because it came with promises, a safe, family-friendly community, a good school nearby, and a homeowners association that cared about neighborhood standards. It sounded like peace. After everything Layla and I had been through, that word had started to feel like a myth. Peace. But I dared to believe we might finally find it here. Layla was my everything. 11 years old, the brightest soul I've ever known. She had a laugh that could light up a room and a curiosity about the world that humbled me daily. She also had spinal muscular atrophy, a rare neuromuscular disorder that confined her to a wheelchair. It didn't stop her from dreaming, from cracking jokes that made strangers smile, or from teaching me daily what strength really looked like. People pitied her when they first met her. They saw her wheelchair before they saw her light. But I always told her, they'll catch up, baby. You're just ahead of their hearts. Being a single mom is a balancing act, even without the added layers of medical bills, school discrimination, and constant accessibility concerns. My days were filled with early morning shifts as a medical coder, school drop-offs, doctor appointments, therapy sessions, and late-night grocery runs. We didn't have much, but what we had was ours, and it was built on a foundation of love, resilience, and fierce loyalty. When we moved into the HOA neighborhood, I thought we were finally stepping into a softer chapter. The first few days were uneventful. People smiled and waved from across their driveways. A welcome basket showed up on our porch. There was even a newsletter announcing an upcoming HOA barbecue. It felt promising. Layla was excited too. She wanted to decorate our porch with purple lights for Halloween, and I told her we finally had a place to do that without fear of being kicked out for some lease violation. But then the letters started coming. They were polite at first, just a friendly reminder. They began. The mailbox was slightly off regulation. The color of our porch railing wasn't within the approved palette. Our garbage bin was visible for a few hours too long on collection day. Little things, petty things, things that didn't matter to anyone with a beating heart. But they mattered here. Or rather, they mattered to her, Karen. I didn't know her name at first, only that the same tightly worded notices all came signed from the HOA president. It wasn't until I saw her at the community park one weekend that I put the name to the face. She was supervising the park like a prison warden, clipboard in hand, making notes on someone's overgrown hedge. When she saw Layla and me wheeling up to the swing area, I caught the twitch in her jaw. She smiled, but it never touched her eyes. You're the new homeowner on Willow Lane, right? I'm Karen, president of the HOA. Just making sure everything stays consistent. Consistent. That word would haunt me in the weeks to come. Karen never said anything directly offensive, never crossed any line that could get her into legal trouble. But there was a constant underlying message in everything she said, a quiet hostility, a subtle resistance. She'd comment on Layla's ramp being a bit too long for the front yard aesthetic. She'd make a point to ask whether we had special clearance for the customized mailbox I installed with Braille numbers for Layla. At the Halloween gathering, she said my decorations looked a bit too urban. Urban. I bit my tongue. I had to. But Layla noticed. She always noticed. We tried to stay out of her way. I focused on work, Layla focused on school. We made friends slowly. Mrs. Thompson from 2 doors down would bring Layla cookies, and a teenage boy named Trevor helped her down the curb one day when I was running late. But still, it always felt like we were being watched, judged, the weight of not belonging pressed into our shoulders like something physical. Still, we smiled. We endured, because I believed that if we just stayed quiet, stayed respectful, we'd be left in peace. I didn't realize that people like Karen don't want peace. They want power. And when they feel that power slipping, even just a little, they look for someone to punish for it. Someone different. Someone easy to scapegoat. Someone like my daughter. And it was that slow, creeping realization, the dread growing in the corners of our quiet days, that led to the day I'll never forget. The Carnival day, when everything changed, when the line between neighbor and predator was shattered forever. Karen Mitchell was the kind of woman who could run a neighborhood like a military base while still smiling sweetly for the holiday newsletter. The president of the Brookidge Estates HOA for 6 straight years, and unchallenged each time, she was, to most on the surface, the perfect neighbor. Her lawn looked like it belonged in a landscaping magazine. Not a leaf dared fall without her permission. Her mailbox stood precisely 42 inches above the curb, the HOA mandated height, and she made sure everyone else's did too. Her emails came with pastel-colored backgrounds and passive-aggressive kindness that made you feel guilty for breathing incorrectly. Karen was the type who'd bake cookies for your welcome party and then fine you the next morning because your porch light bulb was the wrong wattage. A former real estate agent and self-declared community organizer, she thrived on regulations and hierarchy. But beneath the freshly ironed blazers, the pearl earrings, and her fake politeness, there was a need, no, an obsession, to control everything around her. It wasn't about the rules. It was about power. And God help you if she thought you were disrupting her perfectly curated neighborhood aesthetic. Our first real encounter came just 1 week after we moved in. Layla had insisted we decorate the porch with small rainbow-colored LED lights, a tradition we carried from our last home to celebrate each month she stayed healthy. It wasn't flashy. It was heartfelt. But that didn't matter to Karen. The next morning, I found a typed note taped to our front door. Reminder, exterior decorative lights must conform to HOA standards, white or warm white only. Kindly replace or remove non-compliant lighting within 48 hours to avoid citation. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a signature. Her tone was like a watermark burned into every word. I tried to brush it off. Maybe she really did care that deeply about color schemes. I swapped out the lights and told Layla it was no big deal. But it didn't stop there. The next week, Karen approached us in person. We had just installed a portable wheelchair ramp that extended from the porch to the walkway. It was safe, it was standard, and most importantly, it gave Layla independence. Karen strolled by with her tiny designer dog in hand, stopped right at the edge of our driveway, and squinted like she was studying an eyesore. You know, she began with a voice dripping in honeyed condescension. That ramp is quite prominent. I understand the need, of course, but perhaps painting it a more neutral color would help it blend in? We do like to keep things uniform here. I stared at her, stunned. Layla sat beside me in her wheelchair, gripping the armrest tightly. My jaw tightened, but I nodded and muttered something polite. I hadn't yet learned what kind of woman I was dealing with. Karen controlled everything. Fences had to be within specific shades of beige, grass couldn't be longer than 2.5 inches, and even Halloween decorations had to be tasteful and HOA approved. When I hung a handmade wreath Layla crafted for fall, we were issued a warning because it obstructed the peephole. When I left Layla's therapy schedule taped to the inside of our storm door, Karen personally removed it and left a note saying it looked cluttered from the street. Nothing escaped her. Nothing was too small. And everything was a battle. At first, I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe she treated everyone like this. But as I started to talk to the neighbors, quietly, cautiously, I realized something chilling. She did treat everyone like this, but only some dared to admit it. Most people were too afraid to say anything publicly. Karen had a habit of making life difficult for those who push back. One neighbor, Mrs. Patel, once questioned a $50 fine for a non-regulation flower pot and suddenly found herself buried in weekly citations, trash bin violations, fence height disputes, and even noise complaints for her wind chimes. Another family, whose teenage son accidentally parked a friend's bike on the sidewalk, received a notice threatening escalation to city code enforcement. Karen didn't just enforce rules, she weaponized them. She ran Brookidge estates like a queen ruling a castle, and her reign was silent, orderly, and deeply feared. No one challenged her at HOA meetings. The few who did were politely shut down, their questions deflected with a fake smile and a printed rulebook. Karen had a way of using kindness as a sword, cutting you down while making it seem like she was helping, and beneath all of it, there was something else, something colder. She didn't just dislike rule breakers, she disliked difference. Anything that stood out was a threat to her illusion of perfection. And in that neighborhood, Layla's wheelchair, our small celebrations, our very presence, it all disrupted the image Karen had constructed. She never said it aloud, never even hinted it directly. But I saw it in the way her eyes lingered when Layla wheeled by, the tightness of her smile, the way her tone changed when speaking to us compared to others. It was as if she couldn't bear the idea that someone like Layla existed in the same space she called perfect. Karen didn't see Layla as a child. She saw her as a blemish. And what I didn't realize, what no one warned me about, was that the more you try to quietly exist in a place ruled by someone like Karen, the more dangerous that existence becomes. Because one day, the silent war she wages turns loud. And for us, that day was the carnival. The day her obsession crossed the line from rules to revenge. It started small, barely noticeable like a hairline crack in a wall, but over the weeks, Karen's hostility toward us turned methodical, deliberate. At first, it was the letters. Then came the fines, always for something petty. One week, it was a $25 penalty for leaving the recycling bin out past the designated return window. Another time, it was $50 for unauthorized seasonal decor. Layla had painted a pumpkin purple and left it on our steps. The notice said it clashed with the HOA's autumn aesthetic. I appealed it. Karen denied it with a pasted quote from the bylaws. Then she issued another warning for the color of the wind chime on our porch. Unapproved metallic finish, she claimed, and just like that, the gentle facade of neighborly concern was gone. Karen had dropped the act. We were officially her target now. But what made my skin crawl, what turned this from an annoying feud into something darker, was when I noticed a photo of Layla attached to one of the citations. A grainy black and white image of her in the yard, playing with sidewalk chalk near our driveway. The complaint read, "Drawing on common property." The photo was time-stamped. I looked at the time, 11:46 a.m. I had been inside making lunch. Someone had to have taken that photo from across the street, hidden behind a curtain, or zooming in through a telephoto lens. Karen didn't just want to find us, she wanted to document us, track us, watch us. I felt exposed, like every move we made was being cataloged and reviewed for punishment. Layla began to sense it too. My once sparkling daughter, who used to wave at every passing neighbor, started staying closer to the house. She stopped asking to go to the park. She glanced out the window before rolling onto the porch, making sure no one was watching. One evening, after overhearing Karen speaking to someone in the yard about certain residents who don't fit the community's vibe, Layla asked me a question no child should ever have to. "Mom, do I make this place look bad?" That question shattered me. I knew then that it wasn't just about HOA rules or a grumpy neighbor. It was something more personal, more poisonous. Karen didn't just dislike our presence. She wanted us out. She'd begun submitting formal reports to the HOA board suggesting we were creating disruptions, claiming our yard was a visual hazard, and even alleging that our ramp violated setback lines. It was all nonsense, but it was persistent. She was building a case, trying to wear us down. I reached out to a few board members quietly. Some sympathized. Others were too afraid to go against her. One whispered over the phone, "She's done this before to a family with a special needs child 3 years ago. They moved out within months. Don't poke the bear." I hung up, fists clenched. I didn't care if she'd done this before. I wasn't leaving. And I wasn't going to let Layla feel like she didn't belong just because one woman had a god complex. Still, I had to pick my battles. I started keeping logs of everything, every fine, every visit, every bizarre citation. I installed cameras. I documented Layla's activities in case she tried accusing us of something again. I wasn't paranoid, I was preparing, because I could feel something coming. Then one day, a brightly colored flyer arrived in our mailbox. Bold block letters read, "Brookidge Community Carnival, sponsored by your HOA. Cotton candy, rides, games, live music, fun for the whole family." It said, in nauseatingly cheerful font. I immediately saw Karen's name printed at the bottom. Hosted by HOA President Karen Mitchell. My gut twisted. Layla saw the flyer and her face lit up. "Can we go, Mom? Please? I've never been to a carnival before." I hesitated. Every instinct in me screamed no. Karen hosting a family event sounded like a setup, a trap wrapped in glitter and streamers. But then I looked at Layla, her eyes wide with hope, her hands already clutching the flyer. She had spent the last few weeks shrinking inside herself, avoiding the park, avoiding smiles. And now, something finally sparked joy in her again. How could I say no? "I'll think about it." I said, hugging her tightly. But my mind was already racing with caution. I'd go with her. I'd stay close. I'd make sure nothing happened. But I underestimated Karen, because while I was preparing to be careful, she was preparing something else entirely. Something cruel. Something premeditated. And as I stood staring at that flyer in the kitchen that night, I didn't yet know that this carnival, this innocent, glittering event, would become the scene of the most horrifying moment of our lives. The day of the carnival arrived like any other warm Saturday in spring. Sunlight filtered through cottony clouds, kids zigzagged on the sidewalks holding helium balloons, and the smell of buttered popcorn floated in the air, mingling with laughter and carousel music. From a distance, Brookidge Estates looked alive in a way it rarely did. Neighbors talking, children chasing bubbles, HOA members in bright polo shirts handing out tickets at the entrance gate. But underneath the vibrant colors and forced smiles, something felt off. I couldn't shake it. The kind of wrong you feel in your bones before your mind even catches up. Maybe it was the way Karen was dressed, head to toe red, clipboard clutched like a weapon, that permanent smirk affixed to her face like she'd already won something. Or maybe it was how, despite being surrounded by people, I felt like I was watching us as we walked in, me pushing Layla's chair slowly down the pavement toward the main fairground. Layla's eyes were bright. She hadn't smiled this wide in weeks. Look, Mom, a Ferris wheel. And they have a spinning ride, too. Her excitement was contagious, and for a brief moment, I let myself enjoy the joy in her voice. She pointed at a ride across the fairground, a compact, circular spinning cage with open bars and a few side-facing seats, aptly named the Cyclone. It wasn't the safest-looking ride, but Layla didn't seem to care. She just wanted to feel normal, included. We visited a few stalls first. Won a small plush animal, shared a funnel cake, listened to a local band play off-key country hits. It was almost peaceful. Almost. And then Karen appeared. She swooped in like a hawk in pearls, appearing over Layla's shoulder just as I turned to look at the map board. Well, if it isn't our neighborhood stars, she said, her voice like syrup poured over rusted nails. Layla, dear, you look lovely today. Are you having fun? Layla, ever polite, nodded. Yes, thank you. I love it here. Karen's smile widened, but her eyes didn't match. She leaned toward me. You look exhausted, Mom. Why don't you sit for a moment? We have a special seat arranged for Layla on the Cyclone. I made sure the operators saved it just for her. First accessible ride in our carnival history. I blinked, taken aback. Karen never showed this kind of interest. It felt rehearsed, calculated. I opened my mouth to decline, but Layla was already beaming. Can I, Mom? Please? Just one ride? Something in me hesitated. A voice, quiet but persistent, whispered don't. But Layla looked so happy. For weeks, she'd been pulled away from the park, the neighbors, the joy. Could I really say no now? I nodded reluctantly. Okay, but I'll come with you, Karen interrupted smoothly. Oh, don't worry. I'll escort her myself. We've taken precautions. The seat is safe and the operator is well trained. It'll only take a moment. You can relax. Have some lemonade. It's on the house. And before I could object, she was already rolling Layla toward the ride with that fake smile charm that she weaponized so well. I froze in place for a moment, uncertain, watching their backs as they disappeared into the crowd. I moved toward the snack table, thinking I'd follow them in a minute. Maybe Karen was trying to play nice. Maybe. But as I turned back around with a small cup of lemonade in my hand, something in the pit of my stomach twisted violently. My eyes scanned the crowd and locked on the ride. Layla was already on the Cyclone. She was seated in one of the smaller compartments near the far end of the ride, one that looked more open, less padded. The operator, a disinterested teen chewing gum, pulled the safety bar down over her. Karen stood nearby, whispering something into his ear with a hand on the control panel. I couldn't hear what she said, but the operator's expression changed. He shrugged and hit a button. The ride began to creak, jerking forward with a jolt. Panic prickled at the back of my neck. Layla looked confused. Her hands grasped the bar, her lips moved, but her voice was drowned out by the sudden blare of carnival music. I ran toward the ride entrance, but the crowd blocked my way. The cyclone started spinning. Faster. Louder. A screech of metal rang out, and then I saw it. Layla's seatbelt was hanging loose. Not unbuckled. Removed. Her body jerked sideways with every centrifugal turn, her arms flailing as she tried to stay upright. I screamed, pushed through the crowd, and shouted at the operator, "Stop the ride! Stop it now!" He looked startled but didn't respond fast enough. The machine groaned as it spun faster, Layla, now nearly perpendicular to the seat, barely hanging on. Her small hands clutched the thin safety bar with a white-knuckled grip, but her strength was no match for physics. She screamed. Her head whipped to the side. People began to notice. Gasps. Phones raised. A child started crying nearby. And then it happened. A metallic clunk, the bar-locking mechanism gave way. Layla's body slipped. Her head slammed into the edge of the seat. Blood. That was when I climbed the platform. I didn't care who was yelling at me, didn't care about rules or safety. I threw myself at the control panel and slammed the emergency stop button with both hands. The ride stuttered, coughed, and slowly began to slow down. The silence afterward felt like an explosion had just ended. I ran to my daughter, heart pounding, lungs burning, hands shaking. Her face was pale, her eyes barely open, her arms limp. She whispered, "Mommy," the seat she didn't, and then she passed out. People swarmed around. Someone called for paramedics. I held her tightly, sobbing, cradling her broken body, knowing in that moment that this wasn't an accident. This wasn't negligence. This was an attack, a punishment, a statement. And standing calmly off to the side, just far enough to avoid attention, was Karen, arms folded, expression calm, watching like a queen surveying the aftermath of a war she orchestrated but didn't have to fight. That was the moment I knew. She didn't just want to control us. She wanted to destroy us. The hours that followed the ride incident were a blur of flashing ambulance lights, rushing paramedics, and a whirlwind of fear so paralyzing that my body moved, without my mind fully catching up. Layla was rushed to the hospital with a mild concussion, bruised ribs, and deep abrasions along her shoulders and neck. Injuries sustained from being flung around a high-speed ride with a disabled seatbelt. I sat by her side all night in the emergency room, holding her hand as her tiny body twitched in restless sleep, flinching with every hospital sound. Her eyes would flutter open briefly, only to whisper, "She didn't buckle me. Mommy, she didn't." And then she'd fall back into a disturbed, medicated sleep. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shatter the hospital windows with my fists, but I couldn't fall apart. Not yet. My daughter needed me awake, alert, strong. The very next morning, I went straight to the HOA office, demanding an investigation, demanding accountability. Karen wasn't there, conveniently working remotely that day. I asked to review the Carnival security footage from the ride area, explaining clearly that there was an intentional attempt to harm my daughter. The assistant, young, timid, looked confused and claimed the HOA didn't have access to the ride's video systems. The camera on the ride? Oh, that one wasn't recording. Or it was, but the footage didn't save properly. There was a system malfunction. I stared at her, my jaw locked in disbelief. How could one of the only cameras monitoring the ride Layla was injured or not be working? I demanded to speak to someone in authority. An older board member came in with a perfectly rehearsed smile and a file folder under his arm. "I understand this has been traumatic," he began, voice smooth like he'd practiced the line in the mirror, "but our records indicate that your daughter may not have been fully secured due to movement during the ride. There's no evidence suggesting foul play. In fact, witnesses recall you giving permission and then walking away." I blinked. "Are you suggesting this is my fault?" He raised his hands. "We're not placing blame. We're simply saying that perhaps in the chaos of the day, some safety steps may have been missed. We'll review everything internally." I walked out of that room shaking, anger, grief, and betrayal twisting inside me like a storm. I knew what this was. A cover-up. They were closing ranks around Karen, protecting her, and worse, painting me as negligent. A mother who let her disabled child get hurt at a neighborhood event because I was careless. The HOA bylaws were airtight. I read them for hours. No one could sue for incidents at sponsored events unless gross negligence could be proven, and with the footage gone and the operator denying involvement, there was no path forward legally. I contacted a lawyer anyway. After hearing the details, he sighed and said, if it's an HOA event and they claim the safety mechanisms were followed, this is going to be next to impossible, especially if she wasn't thrown off the ride completely. You're fighting shadows. But the real horror wasn't the lack of justice. It was what came next. Layla changed. She wasn't the same girl who once giggled through doctor visits or painted chalk murals on the sidewalk. She stopped going outside. She didn't want to return to school. She started having nightmares, screaming in her sleep, waking up in a cold sweat, clutching her chest and crying that she was falling again. The ride replayed in her mind like a looped horror film she couldn't shut off. I tried everything: comfort, distraction, denial, tough love. But it wasn't enough. Finally, a pediatric trauma therapist diagnosed her with acute PTSD. She couldn't be around fast-moving objects. Loud Carnival music triggered panic attacks. Even a balloon popping made her flinch like she'd been struck. Each session with the therapist peeled back a new layer of trauma. Layla revealed things she hadn't told me. That Karen had leaned in and whispered, "You'll be just fine," in a tone that felt like a warning, not a comfort. That the ride operators seemed confused until Karen pointed at the control panel. That she'd reached for the seatbelt, but Karen tucked it behind the seat and said it wasn't needed. My heart shattered in ways I didn't know were possible. I had failed to protect her from a monster hiding behind HOA rules and manicure smiles. And that monster was still out there, untouched, unpunished, walking her dog every morning, hosting neighborhood brunches, sending out cheery newsletters about lawn maintenance and community pride. Every time I saw Karen on our street, something inside me boiled. She'd nod politely, like we were just neighbors passing each other on a quiet walk. No guilt, no remorse, just chilling composure. The worst part? Other neighbors avoided eye contact. They knew what had happened. The story had spread, but no one said a word. The silence was deafening. The HOA had spoken, and that was that. Karen was innocent. The incident was unfortunate. And Layla's trauma? Just a sad footnote in another HOA newsletter. I didn't care about the fines anymore, or the citations, or the HOA notices. I cared about my daughter sleeping through the night again, about her smiling without flinching. And I promised myself one thing as I tucked her in every night: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Karen thought she had silenced us, but she had just awakened something far more powerful. A mother's fury wrapped in quiet resolve. The truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface, especially when a mother digs for it with bare, bloodied hands. I knew from the moment I saw Karen watching us at the carnival, cold and composed, that she had orchestrated the entire thing. The ride, the seatbelt, the cover-up. But knowing and proving are two different beasts. The HOA had closed its doors. The board had shrugged it off. The footage was mysteriously gone. The neighbors were silent. But I wasn't. I couldn't be. My daughter was still waking up screaming, still jumping at loud sounds, still afraid to sit in her wheelchair unless I double-checked every strap myself. So I declared war, not with fists but with facts. I began with the ride itself. I found the name of the rental company from a tiny logo sticker on the side of the Cyclone. It was a small family-run business from 2 towns over. I drove there in person. I didn't call. I knew I'd be dismissed on the phone. When I arrived, I asked to speak with the owner, a man named Dwight. I told him what happened to Layla. I showed him the medical reports. His face dropped as he scanned the pages. "We never remove seatbelts," he said quietly. "That model has 3-point harnesses as standard. If it was missing, someone did it after setup." That was the first crack. Then came the second. I tracked down the ride operator, the teenager who'd been manning the Cyclone that day. His name was Jordan. He wasn't easy to reach. His number wasn't listed anywhere. But teenagers talk, and one of the local high schoolers on the HOA committee recognized him from a school club. I found him working at a hardware store stocking shelves. At first, he denied everything, claimed he didn't notice anything wrong with the ride. But when I showed him a photo of Layla in the hospital, his hands started to shake. He asked if we could talk somewhere private. He told me Karen had asked him to disable one of the seatbelt units to accommodate a special guest. She'd insisted it would be safer that way because of the wheelchair transfer, claimed she'd spoken to the family and had it all cleared. He didn't question her. She was the HOA president. I thought she had permission, he said, guilt weighing every word. She said she'd take full responsibility. I didn't think anyone would get hurt. I recorded his statement with his consent. Still, I needed more. I reached out to former HOA members, those who had stepped down in the past 5 years. Most ignored me. One blocked me. But finally, a woman named Cheryl called me back. She had served as secretary under Karen for 2 years. And what she shared made my blood run cold. Karen had a pattern. She didn't just enforce rules, she used them to harass minorities, single parents, disabled residents. She made it her mission to preserve the image of the neighborhood, Cheryl said. She used that phrase a lot. We tried to push back, but she manipulated the bylaws and intimidated people into silence. Cheryl had kept emails, screen captures of Karen's directives, some of which bordered on discriminatory. She sent them to me. That was the moment I knew this had to go public. I created a Twitter thread detailing the entire story, what happened to Layla, the cover-up Karen's history. I added photos, documents, quotes. It went viral in less than 48 hours. Parents, disability advocates, and even HOA survivors flooded the replies. Local news outlets picked it up. Within a week, the neighborhood's private Facebook group turned against Karen. People who once stayed silent began sharing their own stories. Petty fines, harassment, targeting. Someone anonymously posted video footage of Karen berating a gardener for trimming a hedge too artistically. The final blow came when Jordan, the ride operator, came forward publicly. He posted a video confessing that Karen had instructed him to disable the seatbelt and that she had told him to lie if anyone asked. That video spread like wildfire. Suddenly, Karen wasn't untouchable anymore. Her silence turned from smug to panicked. The HOA board was flooded with calls for her resignation. Protest signs appeared on neatly manicured lawns. Justice for Layla. HOA is not equal to Queen. I didn't even have to knock on their door again. They came to me. Apologies, excuses, promises of internal review. But I wasn't interested in their sorries. I had something better now. The truth. And it was louder than any HOA fine, stronger than any rulebook Karen ever wielded. The meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday evening in the Brookidge Community Center, a sterile, beige-colored room that had hosted years of uneventful HOA discussions about streetlight wattage and hedge height. But not tonight. Tonight, it was packed to the brim. Every folding chair was taken. People stood in the back and spilled into the hallway, their eyes all fixed on the raised platform where the board usually sat with indifference. But tonight, indifference was not an option. I had formally demanded this emergency open forum under Clause 3.5 of the HOA Charter. Legally, they had to allow me 10 minutes to speak. But I wasn't going to need that long to make an impact. Karen sat at the center of the board table, tight-lipped and stiff. Her signature red blazer was buttoned high, her hair sprayed into submission. She looked calm. But I could see the tension in her jaw, the white knuckles on her clasped hands. She hadn't expected this many people. She hadn't expected the community to show up. As soon as the floor was opened, I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I let the facts speak. The statement from the ride operator, the ride company's testimony, the doctor's report, the missing footage, the emails from Cheryl, the social media storm that had made national headlines. Then I showed them a photo, Layla's bruised face, taken just hours after the carnival. There was a sharp intake of breath across the room. I heard someone whisper, "My God." Karen stood abruptly. This isn't a trial. This is a smear campaign by a resident who refuses to follow community guidelines. No, a voice said, firm and clear. It was Mr. Delgado from 2 streets down. He stood up. You harassed my wife about her garden flags. Said they distracted from neighborhood harmony. A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Then came another voice. Mrs. Johnson, you fined my son for parking his car half an inch over the line. You told him maybe some people don't belong in this neighborhood. Gasps, then another and another. Like a dam breaking, neighbor after neighbor stood to speak. Stories poured out of unjust fines, veiled insults, deliberate exclusions, and the unspoken fear everyone had lived with for years. Karen's face twisted into something sharp, desperate. She banged her palm on the table. This is mutiny. You people are being manipulated by emotion and social media. You have no idea what it takes to maintain order. But then, a small voice rose from the front row. Miss Karen. Everyone turned. It was Layla. She rolled forward in her wheelchair, her voice trembling but clear. You said I didn't need a seatbelt, but I did. I still have nightmares. She held up a drawing she had made, a crooked sketch of the ride, herself falling, and a stick figure with red clothing watching. You didn't want me there, but I live here too. The silence that followed was absolute. Karen sank back into her chair as if the weight of every word, every witness, every consequence had finally landed. The board president, a usually quiet man named Howard, leaned into his microphone. Effective immediately, Karen Mitchell is suspended from her duties as HOA president pending legal review. A third-party investigation will begin this week. And just like that, her kingdom collapsed. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just reached for my daughter's hand. Because justice doesn't always come with a bang. Sometimes it comes with the quiet courage of a little girl who refuses to be silent. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It drips in slowly, like sunlight filtering through heavy curtains after a long storm. In the days and weeks that followed the HOA meeting, something in the air began to shift. Layla smiled more. Not constantly, and not without shadows in her eyes, but the heaviness that once clung to her like a second skin started to lift. Her nightmares became less frequent, her voice grew stronger, and one afternoon, without prompting, she wheeled herself to the front porch, sat under the wind chime she once feared, and just listened to it sing. That was the moment I exhaled, for the first time in what felt like months. We were not the same people who had arrived in Brookidge Estates looking for a peaceful life. We were stronger now, scarred but standing, and more importantly seen. Layla's story didn't just fade after the headlines cooled. Her courage had reached beyond our street. A local disability rights group reached out after seeing the story online, and soon Layla was volunteering, speaking sometimes just softly, sometimes with great conviction about accessibility, about fear, about what it means to feel invisible. Her first school visit brought her to tears, but they were tears of triumph. She told me afterward, Mom, maybe what happened to me can help stop it from happening to someone else. That's who she is. That's who she's always been. A fighter in the gentlest form. As for Karen, her reign ended as swiftly as it had begun. Her resignation was quiet, handed in by envelope, and never read aloud. Her house stood dark for weeks, the once pristine yard growing wild, as if the earth itself was tired of pretending. Eventually, a moving truck arrived, and Karen vanished from the neighborhood she once ruled. No one waved goodbye. No one cared to ask where she went. Her power had depended on fear, and once fear was gone, so was she. The board restructured after that. New members were elected, people who'd once been afraid to speak up, but now stood proudly in meetings, making sure rules served people, not power. Citations dropped. Conversations rose. A community that once felt like a tightly wound pressure cooker began to breathe. For the first time since we moved in, Brookidge Estates started to feel like a place worth staying in. Neighbors we'd barely spoken to brought over flowers, meals, even heartfelt apologies. One child taped a drawing to our door, a house with big windows, a wheelchair ramp, and hearts floating above it. In crayon, he'd written, "I'm glad you live here." I often sit on the porch now, watching Layla paint or read beside me, and I think about how it took one act of cruelty to tear the veil off 100 small injustices, one girl's courage to expose the cost of silence, one mother's refusal to be ignored. And I remind myself that even in the darkest chapters, there is always a next page. Sometimes it takes one tragedy to reveal the truth hiding behind fake smiles. And sometimes it's the beginning of something beautiful. If you're a mother watching this, I want to speak directly to your heart. Never let your voice be silenced. You are your child's first protector, their fiercest advocate, and sometimes the only shield standing between them and a world that won't always be kind. If your gut tells you something's wrong, trust it. Fight for the truth, even when it's inconvenient, even when the system tells you to sit down and be quiet. And if you live under an HOA, don't just read the rules, know your rights. Empower yourself with knowledge, with documentation, with community. Because no one, not a board, not a title, not a woman in a red blazer, has the right to make you or your family feel small. And to every neighbor, friend, or bystander, if you see someone being bullied, harassed, or excluded, speak up. Silence only strengthens the oppressor. One voice raised in truth can ignite a chorus of change. Now it's your turn. Share your story below. Have you ever faced HOA harassment? Has your family been targeted or overlooked? Layla's story isn't just hers. It's for every family that's been pushed to the edge by those who think power gives them the right to dehumanize. This is a space to be heard, to be believed, and to connect. Let's not just expose injustice. Let's build communities where it can't thrive. If this story moved you, if it made you think twice about what real strength looks like, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We tell real stories here. Stories that matter, that cut deep, and that remind us all what it means to stand up when it counts. Because when one mother stands, 1,000 more rise behind her.